A puppy cries and begs a vet to follow him, and what happens next shocks everyone. On a stormy night, a tired, small-town vet is locking up when a muddy little shepherd limps inside, grabs his pant leg, and won't let go. At first, it looks like nothing more than a lost, frightened pup. But the way he cries, like he's trying to say something, pulls the vet into the dark. When the vet finally follows, what he finds hidden in the rain isn't just heartbreaking, it's dangerous. Behind a rusted gate, something alive is waiting, something that should have been impossible. Someone doesn't want the truth to be found, and they'll do anything to keep it buried. Now the vet's caught between his job, his conscience, and a secret powerful men are willing to burn to the ground. Why did the puppy lead him there? What secret was crying for help in the storm? And how far will one man go to do the right thing, when doing it could cost him everything? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Dr. Silas Whitcomb signed the last chart of the day. Rain drummed against the windows of his small veterinary clinic, matching the heavy rhythm of thoughts pounding in his head. Another memo had arrived that morning from corporate headquarters, his third warning about protocol violations in 3 months. He ran his weathered hands over his face, feeling every line earned from 20 years of treating animals. The clock on the wall read 7:15 in the evening. Time to lock up and head home, where at least he could escape the suffocating corporate policies that seemed to care more about paperwork than pets. Thunder cracked outside as Silas began his closing routine. He was halfway through wiping down the exam table when a sharp whine cut through the storm sounds. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing at the front door where a sodden shape pressed against the glass. "We're closed," he muttered, more from habit than conviction. But as he approached, his heart sank at the sight of a German shepherd puppy, no more than 6 months old, covered in mud and favoring its left front paw. The pup's eyes locked onto his, and before Silas could decide what to do, it started scratching frantically at the door. His hand hesitated on the lock. The new corporate policy was crystal clear: no after-hours treatments without proper paperwork and payment arrangements. His last warning had specifically mentioned taking in strays, but the puppy's cries grew more urgent, piercing straight through his professional caution. The moment he cracked the door, the shepherd darted inside, leaving muddy paw prints across the freshly mopped floor. Instead of seeking shelter or attention, though, it immediately clamped onto Silas's pant leg with gentle but insistent teeth. "Hey now, easy there," Silas said, trying to disengage. The pup released his leg but circled back, whining with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't normal attention-seeking behavior. The dog was trying to communicate something specific. Each time Silas stepped away, the puppy returned to his leg, tugging toward the door with increasingly frantic energy. Its cries took on a sharp, desperate pitch that he'd never heard before in his decades of practice. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the empty parking lot. The storm was getting worse, sheets of rain now falling sideways in the wind. Every rational thought told him to stay put. He was already on thin ice with corporate, and heading out in this weather based on a stray dog's behavior was exactly the kind of thing they'd fire him for. But 20 years of instinct told him something else. The pup's behavior was too focused, too urgent. This wasn't random. Something or someone needed help. "Damn the protocols," Silas muttered. He grabbed his heavy-duty field kit from beneath the counter, the one he'd used back in his large animal practice days. After a moment's hesitation, he added extra bandages and his spare flashlight. The puppy's tail wagged once when it saw him heading for the door, but there was no playfulness in its demeanor. As soon as Silas clicked off the lobby lights and stepped outside, the shepherd shot forward into the rain, then looked back to make sure he was following. Cold water immediately soaked through his coat as Silas jogged after the dog. They passed the town's main street, where headlights from occasional cars smeared across the wet asphalt like watercolor paintings. The pup led him past the last streetlight and toward the old industrial district, where abandoned warehouses loomed like sleeping giants. His breath came in sharp bursts as they crossed the rutted access road leading to the railway tracks. The wind picked up, driving the rain horizontally and plastering his coat against his body. But the shepherd never hesitated, picking its way purposefully through puddles and around debris. They passed a sign warning about private property and trespassing, its red letters barely visible in the gloom. Silas's boots crunched on gravel as they entered railway property, where a massive old depot hulked against the stormy sky. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows dark, empty eyes staring out at nothing. The pup paused at the corner of the structure, looking back at Silas with an intensity that made him quicken his pace despite his uncertainty. Every step took him further from the safe, predictable world of corporate veterinary medicine. But with each urgent whine from his four-legged guide, he became more certain that following had been the right choice. Water streamed from his hair into his eyes as he reached the corner of the depot. The shepherd's tail was now tucked, its ears forward as it waited for him to catch up. Thunder rolled overhead, but beneath it, Silas thought he heard something else, a sound that made his heart beat faster and confirmed his decision to break all the rules tonight. His feet crunched on the gravel as he moved forward, the field kit heavy in his hand. The wind howled around the corner of the old building, but Silas barely noticed the cold anymore. Something needed him out here in the darkness and the rain. Something had sent this mud-covered messenger to find him specifically. The pup's next whine was barely audible over the storm, but its meaning was clear. Hurry! Silas took a deep breath and rounded the corner, leaving the last lights of town behind as he followed his guide into the shadows of the depot. The rain hammered against the metal roof overhead, creating a deafening symphony of drops and pings that seemed to isolate this moment from the rest of the world. Each step took him further from the brightly lit, rule-bound clinic and deeper into unknown territory, where his only guide was a desperate puppy and his own instincts. His coat now hung heavy and dripping, but Silas pressed on, trusting in the wisdom that had brought him here. Corporate protocols and final warnings seemed very distant now, washed away by the rain and the growing certainty that something important waited ahead in the darkness. The shepherd moved with renewed urgency, its mud-caked fur almost invisible against the shadows of the depot. Its paws left wet prints on the concrete that disappeared almost instantly in the downpour, but its path remained unwavering, leading Silas deeper into the industrial gloom where ancient railway equipment loomed like prehistoric skeletons. Water coursed down the building's walls in sheets, creating curtains of rain that distorted the world beyond into abstract shapes. But the pup moved with absolute certainty, as if following an invisible trail that only it could perceive. Its occasional glances back at Silas held a mix of worry and determination that kept him moving forward despite the growing discomfort of his sodden clothes. The wind whipped around the corner of the depot, carrying a hint of diesel fuel and rust, the lingering ghosts of the building's busier days. Silas adjusted his grip on the field kit, its familiar weight somehow reassuring in this unfamiliar territory. Whatever waited ahead would need the tools and knowledge he'd carried with him through decades of practice. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the full extent of the abandoned railway yard, a maze of twisted metal and forgotten machinery stretching into the darkness. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the very ground, but the shepherd didn't flinch. Its focus remained absolute, its purpose clear even if its destination remained a mystery. Silas wiped rain from his eyes with his free hand, trying to keep the pup's dark shape in sight as they moved deeper into the shadows. His decision to follow might cost him his job, might violate every corporate policy he was supposed to uphold. But with each step, he became more certain that he was exactly where he needed to be. Rules and consequences be damned. The rain continued its relentless assault as man and dog pressed forward into the night, leaving the safe and familiar world behind. Whatever lay ahead in the darkness, Silas knew he'd made the right choice. Some things were more important than rules, a lesson he'd learned long ago, but sometimes needed reminding of. His boots splashed through growing puddles as he followed his determined guide, the field kit swinging at his side like a pendulum, marking each step away from safety and toward whatever urgent need had brought them here. The night pressed in around them, but Silas moved forward without hesitation, trusting in the wisdom of a mud-covered messenger and his own instinct to help those in need. The German Shepherd pup moved with renewed purpose now, darting between stacked wooden pallets that loomed like dark sentinels in the rain. Silas followed, his boots splashing through deepening puddles as they approached a massive shipping container near the abandoned rail depot. The container's corrugated steel walls were streaked with rust, telling stories of years left to the elements. Through the drumming rain, another sound reached his ears. Faint, desperate whimpers coming from within the metal box. The pup pressed its nose to a seam in the container's wall, pawing frantically at the steel. Silas ran his hands along the damp surface, feeling for any weakness. His fingers found a loose panel, warped by time and weather. He wedged his shoulder against it, pushing until the metal groaned and gave way just enough for him to squeeze through. The stench hit him first, a thick, nauseating mix of waste and fear that made his eyes water. Pulling out his phone, he switched on its flashlight, and the beam cut through darkness to reveal a nightmare. Metal cages lined both sides of a narrow corridor, stacked too high, each containing shadows that shifted and whined at his presence. As he moved the light across the cages, eyes reflected back at him, dozens of them, belonging to dogs in various states of neglect, their ribs pressed against dull, matted fur. Some cowered at his approach while others pressed hopefully against their cage doors, tails wagging weakly. The pup darted ahead, leading him to a cage near the back. Inside lay an older German shepherd, her once proud form now gaunt and still. A deep gash along her side leaked blood onto the cage floor, and her breathing came in shallow pants. The young pup pressed against the cage, whimpering as it tried to reach its mother through the bars. "Easy there, girl," Silas murmured, setting down his field kit. He examined the crude lock on the cage, a simple wire mechanism that his multi-tool made quick work of. The door squealed as he opened it, but the injured shepherd barely lifted her head. Her scarred muzzle spoke of old battles, but this wound was fresh and dangerous. Working quickly, Silas pulled supplies from his kit: gauze, antiseptic, pressure bandages. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he cleaned the wound, noting its depth and location. The mother shepherd watched him with tired eyes, but didn't resist his touch. Her pup remained close, occasionally licking her face in encouragement. As he worked, Silas noticed crude metal tags wired to each cage door. Breeding numbers, he realized with growing anger. This wasn't just neglect, it was organized cruelty. He pulled out his phone again, this time opening the camera app. He needed evidence. "Recording timestamp 11:43 p.m. He spoke quietly but clearly, panning his phone across the rows of cages. Multiple dogs showing signs of severe neglect. Identification tags suggest organized breeding operation. He documented the conditions. cage by cage, noting injuries and visible signs of malnutrition. The mother shepherd's wound received special attention. Close-up shots of the gash and the surrounding infection. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside froze him mid-sentence. Headlights swept across the container walls, casting long shadows through the gaps in the metal. The door at the far end hissed as someone pushed it open wider. "Hey, this is private property!" A harsh voice cut through the rain. "You're trespassing!" Silas kept his hand steady on the pressure bandage, counting the seconds needed for the coagulant to take effect. The shepherd pup pressed against his leg, trembling but staying close to its mother. Outside, diesel engines idled, their low rumble carrying an unmistakable threat. He glanced down at the wounded shepherd, seeing trust in her eyes despite all she'd endured at human hands. The pup had chosen him for a reason, had led him here believing he could help. As the footsteps approached from outside, Silas knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't abandon them now. The engines continued their ominous growl, like distant thunder promising a storm. But Silas remained focused on his patient, on the steady pressure needed to save her life. Time seemed to slow in that metal corridor, marked only by the mother shepherd's labored breathing and her pup's soft whimpers of concern. Rain drummed against the container roof, creating a percussion backdrop to the approaching footsteps. The beam of a flashlight swept through the opening, searching. Silas kept his body between the light and his patient's, his hands never leaving the bandage. The pup pressed closer to his leg, its earlier bravery replaced by instinctive fear of those who had caused such suffering. The air grew thick with tension as the footsteps drew nearer. Each cage they passed stirred with movement, dogs shifting anxiously, some growling low in their throats, others shrinking back into shadows. But Silas remained still, counting seconds, focusing on the feel of blood slowly clotting beneath his fingers. Whatever happened next, he needed these few crucial moments to give this mother a fighting chance. Condensation dripped from the container's ceiling, each drop echoing in the cramped space. The flashlight beam grew brighter, closer. The mother shepherd's eyes never left Silas's face, holding a quiet dignity despite her pain. Her pup, mud-caked fur now drying in patchy clumps, maintained its protective stance beside them both. The diesel engines outside revved impatiently, sending vibrations through the metal floor. More voices joined the first, their words muffled by rain and distance, but their tone clear enough. Silas felt the weight of his phone in his pocket, heavy with evidence that needed to survive whatever came next. The footsteps stopped at the container's entrance. Silas took a deep breath, gave the mother shepherd one final reassuring pat, and stepped out into the harsh glare of vehicle headlights. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the rain, a tall man in a crisp uniform, flanked by 2 others in dark rain gear. The uniformed man stepped forward, revealing a weathered face with hard eyes that seemed to calculate everything in terms of profit and loss. "I'm Orrin Keene," he announced, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This is private training property. You're trespassing on a secure facility." Silas stood his ground, water streaming down his face. "I'm Dr. Silas Whitcomb, veterinarian. I have a critically injured animal inside requiring immediate care." "Any animals here are company property." Keene's smile didn't reach his eyes. "If medical attention is needed, we have our own procedures." "Procedures?" Silas's voice rose as he pulled out his phone, making sure the camera was still recording. "Like leaving a dog to bleed out from an infected wound? Like systematic neglect and abuse?" One of the men in rain gear took a menacing step forward, but Keene held up a hand to stop him. A truck engine revved loudly, inching closer until its headlights flooded the space between them. "Final warning, Doctor." Keene's voice dropped dangerously low. Walk away now." Instead, Silas raised his phone higher. Multiple lacerations on female German Shepherd, approximately 6 years old. Signs of previous injuries consistent with fighting or abuse. Severe malnutrition evident in at least 8 other dogs. The pup darted out of the container, placing itself between Silas and the approaching men. Despite its small size, it gave a fierce growl that seemed to surprise even Keen. Rain pounded the metal roof as Silas rapidly assessed his options. The mother shepherd needed immediate medical attention. If he left now with her, he might save one life, but abandon the others to their fate. If he stayed to document more evidence, the confrontation could turn violent. The water was rising around their feet, storm runoff creating shallow streams across the gravel. Time was running out. Making his decision, Silas backed toward the container while keeping his phone, trained on Keen and his men. "I'm taking the injured shepherd for emergency treatment. That's non-negotiable." "The hell you are," one of the men in rain gear snarled, starting forward. But Silas had already ducked inside. Working quickly, he clipped through the remaining wire on the mother's cage with his multi-tool. His hands shook slightly as he slipped a lead around her neck, but his voice remained steady as he continued narrating into his phone. Time is 11:58 p.m. Removing critically injured animal under threat of violence from Orrin Keen and associates. Shouts erupted outside as Silas helped the mother shepherd to her feet. She was weak but mobile, leaning heavily against his leg as he guided her toward the entrance. The pup danced anxiously around them, alternating between encouraging yips to its mother and warning growls at the men outside. "Stop right there," Keen commanded as Silas emerged with the dog. But there was uncertainty in his voice now, the calculation of a man weighing the costs of escalation against the evidence being recorded. Silas kept backing away, one hand steadying the mother shepherd, while the other held his phone high. The pup stayed close, its mud-caked fur bristling as it faced down men many times its size. Tires spun in the gravel as another truck pulled forward, but Silas maintained his steady retreat. Rain plastered his clothes to his skin as he carefully picked his way across the flooding ground, making sure the mother could keep her footing. "This isn't over," Keen called after him, his words nearly lost in a crack of thunder. Silas didn't respond. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other, maintaining the delicate balance between speed and caution. The mother shepherd's breathing was labored, but she kept moving, perhaps sensing this was her chance at freedom. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached Silas's vehicle. He helped the mother into the back, where she collapsed onto a blanket. The pup scrambled in after her, immediately pressing close to offer warmth and comfort. Only when they were all safely inside did Silas allow himself to look at his hands. They were trembling now, the adrenaline wearing off as the reality of what he'd done began to sink in. His phone lay on the passenger seat, screen still glowing with the recorded evidence of the night's events. He stared at it for a long moment, knowing he'd crossed a line that would change everything. Corporate rules, final warnings, job security, all of it seemed trivial compared to the trust in the eyes of the dog and her pup. Back at the clinic, Silas worked with practiced efficiency despite his exhaustion. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he gently lifted the mother shepherd onto the exam table. Her dark fur was matted with mud and blood, but beneath the grime, he could see the noble bearing of a trained service dog. "Easy, girl," he murmured, running his hands carefully along her sides. "Let's get you fixed up." The pup wouldn't leave her side, maintaining a protective stance even as Silas worked. Its trust seemed to reassure the mother, who remained remarkably still, despite her obvious pain. Silas started an intravenous line to combat dehydration and administered pain medication. The deep gash along her flank required careful cleaning and several stitches. As he worked, he noticed other signs of neglect and abuse: old scars, pressure sores from long confinement, and the telltale marks of forced breeding. "Someone really did a number on you," he said softly, cleaning another wound. The mother shepherd's eyes, though tired, watched him with intelligence. There was something familiar about her bearing, her quiet dignity despite her injuries. Following standard protocol, Silas ran the scanner over her shoulder, searching for a microchip. The device beeped, and he reached for his tablet to check the registry. The results made him stop cold. "Canine Rhea," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Status: deceased." He checked the date. 2 years ago, listed as a training accident. But here she was, very much alive, bearing the wounds of systematic abuse. Silas sat heavily on his rolling stool, mind racing. Police dogs didn't just disappear. Their records were carefully maintained, their deaths documented and verified. For Rhea to be here, someone had deliberately falsified those records. Someone with access and authority had orchestrated her disappearance. The pup pressed closer to Rhea's flank, and her breathing steadied at its touch. Despite everything she'd been through, she was still protecting her young. Still serving, still faithful, even after being betrayed by those who should have honored her service. Rain drummed steadily on the clinic's roof as Silas pulled out his phone. He carefully uploaded the photos he'd taken at the depot, close-ups of injuries, the crude identification tags wired to cage doors, timestamps of his narrated documentation. Each image told part of a story that was becoming clearer and more disturbing. He could imagine Keen right now, probably making calls, pulling strings, preparing to bury any evidence of his operation. The thought made Silas's jaw clench. He glanced at the corporate policy manual on his desk, its pages tabbed with sticky notes marking all the rules he was breaking. No after-hours impounds without approval. No contact with outside enforcement agencies without going through proper channels. No unauthorized treatment of service animals. For a moment, he saw the HR memo that would surely come. Violation of established protocols, failure to maintain professional boundaries, termination effective immediately. Silas deleted the thought from his mind as quickly as it had come. He pulled up his contacts and found the number for Hollis Crane. Among local officials, she was the only one he truly trusted, known for her integrity and genuine concern for animals in her care. While the IV drip marked steady time, Silas began drafting a statement, choosing his words carefully. The evidence pointed to something bigger than isolated abuse cases. The shipping container, the falsified records, the branded tags. It all suggested an organized trafficking operation hiding behind the facade of legitimate training. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but it felt smaller now compared to what waited at sunrise. Silas looked at Rhea, at her pup, at the evidence accumulated on his phone. Something had to be done, regardless of the cost. His thumb hovered over Hollis's number as the gravity of his next decision settled over him. Corporate policies and job security seemed hollow compared to the truth lying on his exam table. A decorated canine officer, betrayed and exploited, her very existence erased by those who had profited from her suffering. The IV drip ticked steadily in the quiet clinic as Silas pressed call, knowing there would be no going back from what he was about to set in motion. The clinic door chimed at 4:30 in the morning, bringing in a gust of wet wind and Hollis Crane. She stood in the entrance, rain dripping from her jacket, her sharp eyes taking in the scene before her. Most people would have questioned a pre-dawn call about stolen police dogs and trafficking operations. Hollis simply showed up, ready to work. "Where is she?" Hollis asked, shrugging off her wet jacket. Silas led her to the exam room where Rhea lay on the padded table, the pup still faithfully at her side. Hollis's breath caught as she approached, Her trained eye catalogued the injuries, the signs of neglect, the subtle markers of a working dog's bearing despite everything. "I've got documentation of everything," Silas said, pulling out his phone. "From the moment I found them." They huddled over the screen as he played the video footage from the depot. The beam of his headlamp swept across cage after cage, his voice steady as he narrated timestamps and conditions. Hollis's expression hardened at the sight of the crude branding marks on the cage tags. "I've seen these before," she said, pausing the video to study a particular tag. "On missing pet boards across 3 counties. Same mark, different dogs. People's pets just vanishing." She straightened up, jaw tight. "They're not just trafficking working dogs, they're stealing pets for their operation." She moved to examine Rhea more closely, her touch gentle but professional. The shepherd's eyes tracked her movements with the alertness of a trained officer, even in her weakened state. "There's a statute we can use," Hollis said, still checking Rhea's wounds. "Imminent peril provision. It allows immediate seizure of animals when there's clear evidence of ongoing abuse and risk of death or severe injury." She looked up at Silas. "With your documentation and my authority as animal control, we can move at first light. Legal seizure of all animals at that depot." Silas felt hope kindle in his chest. "What do you need from me?" "First, we document everything properly." Hollis pulled out her official camera. "Chain of custody procedures. Every wound, every mark, every piece of evidence photographed and logged." They worked methodically in the pre-dawn quiet. Hollis photographed Rhea's injuries from multiple angles, noting locations and measurements. Silas carefully bagged the branded zip ties he'd cut from the cages, marking them as evidence. They transferred his video footage to separate drives, ensuring backups existed in multiple locations. "You should know what we're up against," Hollis said as she labeled another evidence bag. "Keen's got contracts with half the municipalities in the county. Police departments, private security firms, they all go through him for their working dogs. There will be pushback, hard pushback." "From more than just Keen?" Silas asked. Hollis nodded grimly. "Politicians don't like scandals touching their departments, especially not ones involving police resources." They spread a map across Silas's desk, plotting their approach to the depot. Hollis marked access points, possible escape routes, areas where other containers might be hidden. "I'll lead the entry team," she said, tracing their route. "We'll need witnesses, independent veterinary assessment of conditions. That's where you come in. You'll handle medical triage on site." "What about backup?" Silas asked. "I've got a few officers I trust absolutely. They'll be there." She looked at him steadily. "But we move fast. Document everything. Once we're in, there's no backing down." The pup watched their planning from its post beside Rhea, ears perked forward as if understanding the gravity of their discussion. When Silas approached to check Rhea's bandages, it made room, but didn't leave its position. Such a small guardian, he thought, but with a will as strong as any he'd seen. Dawn was approaching, the sky outside beginning to shift from black to charcoal gray. Their plan felt fragile in the growing light, so much depending on timing, on evidence, on the right people making the right choices. But it was real. They had a chance to expose what had been hidden, to save the animals still trapped in that depot. Hollis checked her watch and began gathering her gear. "First light in 45 minutes. I'll position my team. Be ready when I call." Silas nodded, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. He looked at Rhea, at her watchful pup, at the evidence they'd carefully assembled. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The pre-dawn quiet held steady as they made their final preparations. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle patter, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what the morning would bring. The pre-dawn quiet shattered as heavy boots thundered down the clinic's hallway. Deputy Marlowe Sutter burst through the door, his crisp uniform and polished badge a stark contrast to his thunderous expression. 2 officers flanked him, hands resting meaningfully on their belts. "Dr. Whitcomb!" Sutter barked, brandishing an official-looking document. "This is a warrant for immediate seizure of a dangerous animal harbored on these premises." Silas's heart dropped as he scanned the warrant's clinical language. Each paragraph was precisely crafted, authorizing not just seizure but humane euthanasia if the animal showed any signs of decline or aggressive tendency. The words were cold, calculated, a death sentence wrapped in legal jargon. "Deputy Sutter?" Hollis stepped forward, her animal control badge visible. "I'm already handling this case. We have evidence of—" "This supersedes your jurisdiction, Officer Crane." Sutter cut her off, his tone dripping with false courtesy. "This is now a matter of public safety." Rhea lay on the examination table, monitoring equipment beeping steadily around her. The shepherd pup pressed close to her side, pawing anxiously at her old service collar, the worn leather a reminder of her former life as a K-9 officer. "She's under medical care," Silas argued, positioning himself between Sutter and the table. "Moving her now could compromise her recovery." "The warrant accounts for that," Sutter smiled thinly. "We're authorized to perform euthanasia on site if necessary." The pup's nervous pawing at Rhea's collar grew more insistent. Its tiny claws caught on a loose seam in the leather, and something small and metallic clinked onto the floor. Hollis's sharp eyes caught the glint, a small brass key, its surface stamped with what looked like a storage unit number. Sutter took a step forward, but Silas smoothly blocked his view, pulling out his phone. "I need to confirm this with your supervisor. The euthanasia protocol requires specific documentation and witnesses." "You're stalling, Doctor," Sutter growled. "I'm following procedure," Silas countered, scrolling through his contacts. "Unless you'd prefer I report protocol violations to the state board?" While Sutter's attention focused on Silas, Hollis casually moved to adjust Rhea's blanket. Her hand swept down, gathering the key in one fluid motion before tucking it into her pocket. The pup watched her with surprising intensity, as if understanding the need for secrecy. Rhea's monitors beeped more rapidly, and Silas seized the opportunity. "Her vitals are unstable. Moving her now would be extremely dangerous. I need your supervisor's direct authorization before proceeding." Sutter's face darkened with impatience. He glanced at his watch, then at his officers. "Post up outside. No one enters or leaves without my approval." He jabbed a finger at Silas. "I'll be back with the necessary signatures. Don't do anything stupid." The deputy stormed out, his boots echoing down the hallway. When the sound faded, Silas and Hollis locked eyes. Without speaking, they both knew they had a precious lead, but also a ticking clock. "The key," Hollis whispered, carefully extracting it from her pocket. The brass surface bore a clear impression. "Unit 247. "How did you know?" Silas asked the pup, who was still watching them intently. "They're smarter than we give them credit for," Hollis replied, studying the key. "Especially when they're protecting family." Rhea's eyes followed their movement, alert despite her weakness. The steady beep of her monitors seemed to count down the minutes they had left. "Sutter will be back," Silas said, checking Rhea's bandages. "With reinforcements and paperwork that crosses every T and dots every I." "Then we better make these minutes count," Hollis replied, already pulling out her phone to search local storage facilities. The pup pressed against Rhea's side, its small body tense with nervous energy. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they worked, racing against time and bureaucracy. Outside, the sky was growing lighter, bringing with it the promise of both dawn and deadline. They had found a crucial piece of the puzzle, but the real challenge would be using it before Sutter returned to enforce his warrant. Through the clinic's windows, they could see the deputy's officers standing guard, their presence a constant reminder of the pressure bearing down on them. The key felt heavy with potential in Hollis's pocket, a tiny brass lifeline that could lead them to whatever secrets Rhea had been forced to protect. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, marking each precious second as it slipped away. In the growing morning light, Silas and Hollis exchanged another knowing look. They had a direction now, but the path ahead would require perfect timing and more than a little luck. The wipers squeaked across the windshield as Silas guided his truck through the thinning rain. Hollis sat beside him, the brass key clutched tight in her hand, directing him through streets slick with puddles. The storm had softened to a steady hiss, but tension crackled in the cab like static before lightning. "Take a right at the next light," Hollis said, checking her phone's map. Valley Storage should be just ahead. They pulled into a lot lined with identical metal buildings, their orange doors numbered in white paint. Security lights cast weak circles in the pre-dawn gloom. Unit 247 waited at the end of a long row, water dripping from its corrugated roof. Hollis stepped out, her boots splashing in a puddle. "Keep watch while I check the lock." Silas scanned the empty lot, heart thumping against his ribs. The key slid in smoothly and turned with a solid click. Hollis pulled the door up slowly to minimize noise, revealing a space about 10 feet deep, stacked with cardboard boxes and metal filing cabinets. "Flashlights," Hollis whispered, pulling out her phone's light. Silas did the same, and they stepped inside. The beam caught dust motes swirling in the air as Hollis opened the nearest file cabinet. Inside, manila folders bulged with papers, each labeled with dates and locations. She pulled one out, spreading documents across a folding table. "Breeding logs," she said, voice tight. "Detailed records of cycles, litters, sales." Her finger traced down a column of numbers. "Look at these payouts. Thousands per pup." Silas picked up a stack of branded tags identical to the ones he'd seen on the cages. Each bore a serial number and price. "They're tracking inventory like a business, because that's exactly what it is." Hollis's words carried a sharp edge. She lifted another folder, this one filled with official-looking forms. "Here, death certificates, transfer papers, medical releases." She stopped suddenly, pulling out one document with trembling hands. "This is it. The affidavit declaring Rhea deceased, signed by Deputy Marlowe Sutter himself." Silas leaned in to read. The language was cold, clinical, describing a training incident resulting in fatal injuries. The date matched the timeline when Rhea had disappeared. "It was all a lie," Hollis whispered. "They didn't just fake her death, they stole her, used her for breeding." She fell silent, staring at another paper that had slipped free. Silas's light revealed it to be a photograph, slightly creased but clear. In it, a younger, healthier Rhea stood proudly beside a man in uniform, his smile bright and confident. The resemblance to Hollis was unmistakable. "That's Wade," she said softly. "My brother. This was taken right after Rhea completed her K-9 certification." Her finger traced the edge of the photo. 6 months before the accident that supposedly killed them both. The pieces clicked together in Silas's mind. They used the same cover story twice, made it look like a training death to hide what really happened. Hollis nodded, her jaw clenched. "Wade started asking questions about missing dogs. Next thing we knew, there was an incident during night exercises. By the time I got there..." She took a steadying breath. The investigation was rushed, closed too quickly, and Rhea vanished. "Until she showed up in that shipping container," Silas finished, "with a pup trying to save her life." They worked quickly after that, photographing every document with their phones. Hollis found more ledgers detailing what looked like a complex network. Missing pets acquired through various means, retired police dogs redirected to training programs, money flowing through shell companies that existed only on paper. "This is bigger than Keene," Hollis said, carefully placing a thick ledger into an evidence bag. "He's just one part of a whole pipeline." Silas pulled a small GPS tracker from his kit and attached it to the bag. "In case someone tries to make this disappear too." "Smart." Hollis sealed the bag with careful precision, her hands steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "We'll need every safeguard. Once this breaks open—" "Are you ready for that?" Silas asked quietly. "This isn't just about the dogs anymore. It's personal." "It became personal the night Wade died," Hollis replied. "I just didn't have proof until now." She squared her shoulders, professionalism masking the grief and anger simmering beneath. "We do this by the book. Build the case right. Make it stick." They did one final sweep of the unit, ensuring everything was back in place. The door came down silently, the lock clicking shut behind them. In Silas's pocket, his phone showed the GPS tracker's steady signal, a small blue dot marking the evidence that could break open years of corruption. The rain had finally stopped as they walked back to the truck. Dawn was creeping into the sky, painting the clouds in shades of gray and pearl. Hollis clutched the photo of Wade and Rhea, her thumb brushing over the worn surface. "You okay?" Silas asked as they climbed in. "No," Hollis answered honestly. "But I will be, once we finish this." They pulled out of the lot, leaving the storage unit behind. But the truth they'd uncovered rode with them, in photographs, in documents, in the quiet ping of a GPS signal, and in the weight of justice too long delayed. The scope of what they faced had grown far beyond a single night's rescue. This wasn't just about one corrupt contractor or one crooked deputy. It was about a system designed to hide crimes behind paperwork, to turn living beings into inventory numbers, to bury inconvenient questions under convenient accidents. And now, with proof in hand and dawn breaking, they carried the responsibility of exposing it all. The midpoint had arrived, the moment when the truth revealed itself as both bigger and more personal than anyone had imagined. What had started with a desperate pup leading Silas through the rain had become a mission to uncover years of hidden wrongs. In the growing light, Hollis studied the photo one more time before carefully tucking it away. The image of her brother and his loyal partner, captured in happier times, would fuel what came next. The truth had been buried once. This time, it would see the light of day. Back at the clinic, Silas booted up his aging computer while Hollis spread the documents across the examination table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they worked to digitize everything, scanning page after page of damning evidence. "These breeding records go back 3 years, Hollis said, carefully feeding another sheet through the scanner. "Look at these dates. They line up perfectly with the surge in missing pet reports." Silas nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he organized the files. "And here's the money trail. Payments routed through shell companies, all leading back to Keene's operation." They worked methodically, making multiple copies of each document. The evidence was too important to risk losing. Hollis had contacts in the state police, specifically Trooper Marcus Chen, a veteran officer whose jurisdiction reached beyond their corrupt county lines. "Marcus is solid," Hollis said as she composed the email. "He can't be bought, and he's got the authority to bring in outside units." She attached the scanned files, along with Silas's photos and videos from the depot. "If anyone can help us do this right, it's him." The reply came faster than expected. Trooper Chen's message was clear and direct. "Preserve lives first, evidence second. We'll coordinate backup, but need 4 hours minimum. Keep communications minimal. Document everything." Hollis leaned against the counter, recalculating. "We can't wait that long. Sutter's going to come back with that warrant, and Keen's probably already moving dogs out of that depot." "So we move tonight," Silas said, checking Rhea's IV line. The injured shepherd's vitals had stabilized, but she was still weak. The pup hadn't left her side, except to curl up on Silas's boot whenever he came close, a gesture of trust that squeezed his heart. "We'll need supplies," Hollis said, already making a list. "Bolt cutters, leashes, muzzles for the scared ones, medical gear too." Silas moved to the supply room, taking inventory. He pulled out oxygen tanks, emergency blankets, and basic first aid supplies. His hands moved automatically, checking expiration dates and equipment conditions, the habits of a lifetime in veterinary medicine serving a purpose he'd never imagined. "The clinic's box truck," he said, returning with an armload of supplies. "It's unmarked, and I've got the keys. We can fit at least 8 to 10 dogs if we're careful." Hollis nodded, adding to her notes. "We'll need to avoid the main roads. Sutter's got his deputies watching, and they all answer to Keen's money." She sketched out a rough map, marking alternate routes through back streets and service roads. They synchronized their watches with Trooper Chen's timeline. 4 hours until backup would cross the county line. That meant moving fast, working smart, and staying under the radar. "No phone calls unless absolutely necessary," Hollis warned. "Sutter's got friends at the dispatch center. They'll be listening for anything suspicious." Thunder rolled in the distance, a low growl that seemed to echo their urgency. The storm was circling back, as if nature itself was providing cover for their mission. Silas checked the forecast on his tablet. Heavy rain expected within the hour. The pup raised his head at the thunder, ears perking forward. He looked from Silas to Hollis, then back to his mother, as if understanding the gravity of their planning. Rhea's tail thumped weakly against the examination table, a small sign of encouragement. "We'll need to fuel up first," Silas said, checking the truck's gauge. "The depot's on the edge of town, and we might need to make a fast exit." Hollis calculated distances on her map. "There's a 24-hour station on Oak Street. The owner's good people, won't ask questions." They packed efficiently, years of respective training showing in their movements. Hollis arranged the rescue gear in easy-to-grab kits, while Silas prepared medical supplies for quick deployment. Each item was chosen with purpose, every detail considered. The pup watched them work, his small body alert but calm. When Silas knelt to check his own boots, the pup pressed against his leg, not seeking comfort this time, but offering support. It was as if the tiny shepherd had appointed himself guardian, making sure his rescuer stayed safe. "He knows," Hollis said softly, watching the interaction. "Dogs always know when something big is coming." Silas scratched behind the pup's ears, drawing strength from the simple gesture. "We're going to need his help again. He found his way to us for a reason." The thunder grew closer, and rain began to patter against the clinic's roof. The storm's return felt like a countdown starting, nature's own timer marking the moments until they had to move. They made final checks, equipment secured, routes memorized, signals agreed upon. 2 short whistles for danger, 3 quick flashes of a pen light for all clear, simple communications that couldn't be intercepted or traced. Rhea's monitors beeped steadily, her condition as stable as they could hope for. Silas adjusted her blanket, double-checked her IV, and made sure she was comfortable. They couldn't move her yet. She needed more time to recover. But they could save the others, bring them to safety before Keen could spirit them away. "Ready?" Hollis asked, shouldering her gear. Silas nodded, picking up his own pack. The pup stood at attention, ready to follow. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. The storm was giving them cover, but also warning them not to waste time. They moved toward the truck, each step measured and purposeful. No more hesitation, no more waiting for permission or worrying about rules. They had evidence of crimes, proof of corruption, and a clear mission. Save the dogs first, then let justice follow in the morning light. The thunder rolled again, closer now, as if counting down the moments until their night would truly begin. They had 4 hours until backup arrived. 4 hours to right years of wrongs. 4 hours to finish what a brave little pup had started when he led Silas through the rain to his injured mother. They loaded the last of the supplies, checked their watches one final time, and prepared to move out. The storm gathered strength above them, promising a night of darkness and rain, perfect conditions for the rescue they were about to attempt. Thunder cracked overhead as Silas eased the box truck down the muddy access road, headlights off. The rain hammered against the windshield in sheets, nature providing the perfect cover for their midnight rescue operation. Beside him, Hollis gripped a set of heavy-duty bolt cutters, her face set with determination. "Park behind those containers," she whispered, pointing to a shadowed spot that would shield them from the main road. "The security camera's been dead for months. Budget cuts they never fixed." Silas guided the truck into position, cutting the engine. The pup, who had insisted on riding in the cab with them, stood alert between the seats, his ears pricked forward. The rain drummed against the roof like countless tiny fists, drowning out all other sounds. "Ready?" Silas asked, checking his medical kit one last time. Hollis nodded, already moving. "You handle the dogs. I'll clear the way." They slipped out into the downpour. Hollis moved with practiced efficiency, her bolt cutters making quick work of the chain securing the depot's side gate. The pup trotted alongside them, somehow understanding the need for silence. The first row of kennels appeared in their flashlight beams. Hollis went to work on the locks, while Silas prepared his equipment. He'd brought slip leads, muzzles for the more frightened dogs, and a supply of soft treats. Anything to make this easier on the animals. "Easy now," Silas murmured to the first dog, a trembling hound mix. He kept his movements slow and gentle, speaking in soothing tones as he slipped the lead over the dog's head. "That's it, good boy. We're getting you out of here." One by one, they worked their way through the kennels. Silas documented everything with his phone's camera, making sure to capture each dog's condition and identification tags. Hollis helped secure the more difficult cases, her experience with handling showing in every careful movement. The pup proved to be an unexpected ally, moving between the kennels like a tiny assistant. He would approach each scared dog first, wagging his tail and offering friendly signals that seemed to say, "These humans are safe." It was remarkable to watch, as if he knew exactly what they were trying to accomplish. "Smart little guy," Hollis whispered, watching him work his magic with a particularly nervous shepherd mix. "He's making our job a whole lot easier." They loaded each dog into the prepared crates in the truck, making sure everyone was secure and comfortable. Silas attached temporary identification tags to each collar, noting details that would help with proper intake later. The process was methodical, professional, everything documented and by the book. The rain continued its steady assault, but they barely noticed now, focused entirely on their task. Water streamed down their faces and soaked their clothes, but each rescued dog made the discomfort meaningless. When they reached the main shipping container, Hollis made quick work of its heavy lock. Inside, more dogs waited, their eyes reflecting the beam of Silas's flashlight. These were the ones they'd seen during his first discovery, the ones that had started all of this. "Almost there," Silas encouraged them, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Just a little longer." They worked efficiently, transferring the dogs to the truck. Each successful rescue felt like a small victory, another life saved from Keen's operation. The pup continued his rounds, offering comfort and encouragement to his fellow canines. The thunder rolled overhead, but the sound felt different now, less threatening, more like applause from the heavens. The rain hammered the container's metal roof in a steady rhythm that matched their careful movements. Silas secured the last dog, a gentle collie mix, into its crate. He double-checked the straps, making sure everything was stable for transport. In his mind, he could already see these dogs safe in the clinic's runs, warm and dry, getting the care they deserved. The ledger they'd found would ensure Keen and his accomplices faced justice. For a moment, standing in the truck's cargo area, Silas allowed himself to feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. Every face he saw represented a life saved, a wrong made right. The pup sat at his feet, tail wagging, as if sharing in the satisfaction of a job well done. Hollis appeared at the truck's rear doors, her rain-soaked hair plastered to her face. "Final count?" 23, Silas replied, patting the nearest crate. "All secure and tagged. The empty crate up front is ready for Rhea when she's strong enough to move." The thunder crashed again, but none of the dogs seemed frightened now. Perhaps they sensed they were finally safe, finally heading toward better days. The pup made one last round, checking on everyone like a miniature supervisor, ensuring quality control. The rain continued its relentless percussion on the metal roof, creating a symphony of hope and promise. Each drop seemed to whisper of warm beds, gentle hands, and the justice that would soon come. For this precious moment, victory had a tangible shape. It looked like 23 wagging tails and one brave little pup who had started it all. Silas secured the final strap, double-checking the cargo load one last time. Everything was documented, every detail recorded for the coming investigation. They had done this right by the book, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence while saving lives in the process. The pup sat proudly at the edge of the truck, surveying their work like a tiny foreman approving a job well done. His coat was soaked, but his eyes were bright with what looked remarkably like satisfaction. He had led them here, and now he was seeing it through to the end. They had done it. Against all odds, against corporate rules and corrupt officials, they had given these dogs a chance at a better life. The rain kept falling, but now it felt like a cleansing force, washing away the darkness of what had happened here. The peaceful moment shattered like glass. Headlights suddenly blazed through the rain, cutting harsh white paths through the darkness. Car doors slammed in quick succession, the sounds sharp as gunshots. Orrin Keen's tall figure emerged from the glare, his movements precise and deliberate. In his hand, a red fuel can swung with casual menace. Without hesitation, he began splashing liquid accelerant along the container's base, the sharp chemical smell cutting through the rain-soaked air. "What are you doing?" Silas called out, his voice tight with alarm. Keen didn't respond. His men moved with practiced efficiency, shoving open the container's vents. The wet ground gleamed with spilled fuel, creating dark pools that reflected the headlights. A match flared in Keen's hand, the tiny flame dancing against the darkness. Time seemed to slow as it fell, end over end, towards the fuel-soaked ground. Fire erupted with a whoosh, racing along the puddled ground in hungry orange tongues. Smoke began to curl through the vents and gaps, clawing its way into the cages they hadn't yet emptied. Rhea, who they'd brought to reunite with her pup once the transfer was complete, lay on her blanket near the container's entrance. Her breathing, already compromised from her injuries, grew labored as smoke filled her lungs. Her eyes rolled back, and she crumpled to the ground, her strong body going limp. "No!" Silas moved to help her, but stopped short as footsteps splashed behind him. The pup darted toward his mother, crying out in distress. Before anyone could grab him, a stack of wooden pallets, weakened by the growing fire, collapsed with a thunderous crash. The pup's yelp cut off as he vanished beneath the falling wood. Hollis reacted instantly, drawing her sidearm with fluid precision. But another sound made her freeze, the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Deputy Marlowe Sutter stepped out of the shadows, his service weapon trained steadily on Silas. Rain ran down his face, but his aim didn't waver. "Walk away," he said, his voice low and final. "Right now." The heat grew intense, searing their skin even through the rain. The air grew thinner as smoke consumed the oxygen. Inside the container, the remaining dogs began to panic, their barks turning to desperate whines as the temperature rose. Silas's mind raced, calculating precious seconds. They had maybe 2 minutes before the smoke became lethal. The GPS tracker in their evidence bag, stored safely in the truck, continued its quiet pinging, their only insurance if everything burned. At least the rescued dogs were secure in the truck, but the ones still inside. He met Keen's eyes and found nothing there, no mercy, no hesitation, just flat determination. This was his end game. Erase the evidence, erase the witnesses, erase any leverage they might have had. Clean and brutal. The container's metal walls groaned as the heat warped them. Somewhere beneath the collapsed pallets, the pup whimpered. Rhea lay motionless, her chest barely rising. The clock had run out. "Final warning," Sutter said, taking a step closer. "Leave now, forget what you saw, or this ends badly." The fire roared louder, drowning out the sound of the rain. Orange light painted everything in hellish shades, reflecting off the wet ground like a demon's mirror. The smoke grew thicker, darker, more poisonous with each passing second. Silas looked at Hollis, saw his own desperate calculation mirrored in her eyes. 23 dogs safely in the truck. The evidence secured. The GPS tracking their location. But Rhea still inside, the pup trapped, and more dogs waiting in their cages as the flames climbed higher. The metal walls creaked again, a sound like tortured screams. Heat shimmered the air, making everything waver like a mirage. But this was no illusion. This was the moment where everything they'd fought for hung in the balance, where justice and cruelty faced off in the rain and fire. Through the smoke, Silas could see Keen's satisfied smile. He'd planned this, probably from the moment they'd discovered the storage unit. No loose ends, no witnesses, no evidence. Just ashes and plausible deniability, backed by a corrupt deputy's badge. The pup's whimpers grew weaker. Rhea's breathing became more shallow. The other dog's cries turned desperate. The fire crawled higher, hungry for fuel, hungry for life. Through the hellish glow, Silas's eyes landed on a water barrel near the loading dock. Without hesitation, he stripped off his jacket and plunged it into the rainwater-filled container, soaking the fabric completely. His hands trembled as he knotted a heavy tow strap around his waist, creating a lifeline back to safety. "Don't even think about it," Sutter warned, his gun still trained on Silas's chest. The deputy's face twisted with a mix of fear and determination. But Silas was already moving. The wet jacket clung to his shoulders as he angled toward the flames. The heat hit him like a wall, singeing his eyebrows even from several feet away. Inside, another whimper from the pup pierced through the roar of the fire. "Last chance!" Sutter shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that same instant, Hollis sprang into action. She grabbed a heavy metal kennel cart and rammed it full force into Sutter's side. The impact knocked him sideways, his shot going wild into the night sky. The pistol flew from his grip, skidding across the wet pavement and disappearing under a parked truck. Silas didn't waste the opportunity. He dropped to his belly, pressing as close to the ground as possible where the air was clearest. The concrete scraped his chest as he crawled forward, calling out in soft, steady tones, "Here, pup. Come on, little one." The heat was unbearable. Paint bubbled and popped on the container walls, the acrid smell burning his nostrils. Sweat poured down his face, instantly evaporating in the inferno. His soaked jacket offered some protection, but he could feel his skin blistering despite it. Through the thick smoke, he caught glimpses of movement, Hollis wrestling with Sutter in the background, while Keen shouted orders to his men. But Silas forced himself to focus only on what was directly in front of him. There, wedged beneath a splintering wooden pallet, he spotted the pup's small body. The young dog lay terrifyingly still, trapped by the collapsed debris. Silas inched closer, his lungs burning with each shallow breath. "I've got you," he whispered, reaching out. The pallet was heavy, its wood creaking ominously. Silas braced his shoulder against it, muscles straining as he pushed upward. For one horrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a crack, the pallet shifted just enough. Silas's hands found fur, and he carefully pulled the pup free. The small body was limp but warm, still alive. Working quickly, he wrapped the pup inside his wet jacket, creating a protective cocoon against the smoke and flames. Above them, a steel support beam gave out a tortured squeal as the heat warped its structure. Silas knew they had seconds. He began his backwards crawl, using the toe strap to guide him toward the exit. Each movement was agony on his raw skin, but he kept going. The beam groaned again, louder this time. Small pieces of debris rained down as the container's structure started to fail. Silas could feel the temperature rising even further, the air becoming nearly impossible to breathe. With one final push, he burst out into the rain-soaked night. The cool air hit his lungs like needles as he coughed violently, still clutching the precious bundle to his chest. Through watering eyes, he saw Hollis working with fierce efficiency. She had managed to get an oxygen mask onto Ria's muzzle, the equipment pulled from their rescue supplies. With strength born of desperation, she dragged the unconscious shepherd away from the burning container into clearer air where she had a better chance of survival. Silas stumbled toward them, gently laying the pup next to its mother. The young dog's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, alive against all odds. Hollis immediately began checking him for injuries while maintaining pressure on Ria's oxygen mask. In the distance, nearly lost under the storm and crackling flames, a tiny electronic device steadily emitted its signal. The GPS tracker in their evidence bag continued its vital work, silently broadcasting their location to approaching state troopers. Help was coming, but they had to hold on. Keen and his men grouped together, their faces illuminated by the fire as they realized their plan was unraveling. Sutter pulled himself to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit the ground. His eyes darted around, searching for his lost weapon. The container groaned again, flames now visible through holes in its roof. But the most precious things, the pup, Ria, and their evidence, were safe. Silas's burned hands shook as he helped Hollis position Ria more comfortably, the older dog's breathing already improving with the steady flow of oxygen. Rain continued to fall, cooling Silas's blistered skin and mixing with the sweat and soot on his face. The pup stirred, letting out a tiny whimper as it pressed closer to Ria's side. Despite everything, they had won this round. The truth would come out, carried in the GPS signals pulsing steadily into the storm-dark night. Through the curtain of rain, Keen's face twisted with desperate rage. "Get the trucks!" he bellowed to his men, his voice cracking with fury. "Move it now!" The command sent his followers scrambling, their boots splashing through puddles as they raced toward their vehicles. Hollis seized her moment. With practiced efficiency, she yanked Sutter's arms behind his back, ignoring his grunt of pain as she secured his wrists with heavy-duty flex cuffs. The plastic strips bit deep, ensuring the corrupt deputy wouldn't slip free. His face pressed against the wet pavement, all his earlier swagger replaced by defeat. "Don't even think about moving," Hollis warned, scooping up Sutter's fallen sidearm from where it had skidded during their struggle. She checked the weapon quickly, her movements precise despite the rain plastering her hair to her face. Meanwhile, Silas's mind raced through their options. The sound of engines turning over spurred him into action. He grabbed the heavy tow strap from their rescue truck, his burned hands protesting as he dragged the thick webbing toward a sturdy guardrail. The metal post was deeply anchored. It would have to hold. "Hollis," he called out. "They'll try to run. We need to control their exit." He secured the strap with quick, tight knots, creating a partial blockade. It wouldn't stop a determined driver completely, but it would force them to choose their escape route carefully. The pup wheezed against his chest, still wrapped in Silas's smoky jacket. Each tiny cough was a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Silas pressed his hand gently against the small body, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath matted fur. Keen's truck roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain as he gunned the engine. The tires spun for a moment on the slick concrete before finding purchase. He shot forward, aiming for the spillway access road, the route Silas had anticipated. "Keep eyes on Sutter," Silas shouted to Hollis as he sprinted for their box truck. He carefully placed the pup in the passenger seat, making sure the jacket kept him warm and secure. The young dog's eyes were bright despite his ordeal, tracking Silas's every move. The concrete had become treacherous, rain turning the industrial lot into a mirror-smooth hazard. Silas navigated carefully but quickly, positioning their larger vehicle to block the main exit. The maneuver would force Keen and his men to follow the flood channel if they wanted to escape, exactly where the approaching law enforcement could intercept them. In the distance, sirens began to wail. The sound was faint at first, barely audible over the storm, but growing stronger with each passing second. Help was coming. They just had to maintain control of the scene until it arrived. Hollis kept her recovered weapon trained on Sutter, while she used her free hand to key her radio. "This is Officer Crane," she transmitted clearly. "Subjects are attempting to flee northbound along the flood. Channel Access Road. We have one in custody, multiple others in vehicles. Be advised, suspects are considered armed and dangerous." The radio crackled with confirmation as Silas returned to check on Rhea. The injured shepherd's pulse fluttered beneath his fingers, weak but steady. The oxygen mask had done its job, helping her breathe through the worst of the smoke exposure. Her eyes opened briefly, recognition flickering as she looked at Silas. "You're going to be okay," he assured her softly, adjusting the mask to ensure maximum flow. "Just keep breathing." Behind them, the shipping container continued to burn despite the downpour. The flames hissed and sputtered as rain fought fire, sending clouds of steam into the night air. Important evidence was surely being destroyed in that inferno, but they had secured what mattered most. The ledger was safe in their truck, along with the damning footage and photographs. The GPS tracker continued its steady transmission, a digital breadcrumb trail leading reinforcements straight to them. The sirens grew louder, multiple units by the sound of it. Hollis maintained her professional calm, but Silas could see the relief in her eyes. They had done it, contained the scene, preserved crucial evidence, and most importantly, saved the dogs. The pup's coughing had eased, his breathing becoming more regular. He watched the activity through the truck's windshield, alert and attentive despite his ordeal. Something about his posture reminded Silas of Ria's K-9 training. That same focused intelligence, that unwavering dedication to duty. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a massive crack of thunder that made the ground vibrate. The storm seemed to be intensifying, as if nature itself was determined to play a role in this final act. Rain hammered against metal roofs and concrete surfaces, creating a percussive backdrop to the approaching sirens. Keen's taillights glowed red through the downpour as his truck navigated the slick spillway road. His men followed in their vehicles, a desperate convoy fleeing into the storm. But they were running straight toward the net that was closing around them. State troopers would be positioned to cut off their escape, armed with the coordinates from their GPS tracker and Hollis's precise directions. Sutter shifted uncomfortably on the wet ground, his uniform soaked through. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, but the threat had drained from his voice. He knew it was over. The corruption he'd helped maintain was finally being exposed. Hollis didn't bother responding to him. She kept her attention divided between their prisoner and the burning container, watching for any sign the fire might spread. But the rain was winning that battle, gradually reducing the flames to smoldering ruins. Silas moved between the injured dogs, monitoring their conditions. The pup had dozed off, exhausted but safe in the truck's cab. Ria's breathing had stabilized, each rise and fall of her chest more regular than the last. They would both need careful veterinary attention, but they had survived the worst. The GPS tracker continued its vital work, sending out regular signals through the storm. It was their insurance policy. Even if something went wrong now, the evidence would lead investigators straight to the truth. The years of abuse, theft, and corruption would finally be dragged into the light. Multiple sirens converged from different directions now, their wailing echoing off the industrial buildings. Red and blue emergency lights began to strobe through the rain, approaching from both north and south. Keen and his men were about to find their escape route closed off from both ends. The rain-slicked spillway became a deadly funnel as Keen's truck fishtailed across the flooded concrete. Water churned around the tires, deepening by the minute as the storm refused to relent. The headlights cut wild arcs through the darkness, reflecting off the torrential sheets of water that cascaded down the channel walls. Behind him, Sutter had managed to partially work free of his restraints. He stumbled forward, his polished boots losing traction on the wet surface. The current, already knee-deep and gaining strength, caught him like a trap. His feet went out from under him as the floodwater pulled at his legs. Without hesitation, Silas grabbed the heavy-duty tow strap from the truck. His hands worked quickly, securing one end around a sturdy guard post. The cold water shocked his system as he waded in, first to his waist, then deeper as he fought against the current toward Sutter's flailing form. "Grab the strap!" Silas shouted over the roar of water and sirens. He lunged forward, seizing Sutter's uniform collar just as the deputy started to go under. The man who had threatened him with a gun mere minutes ago now clung to him like a lifeline. With strength born of desperation, Silas hauled them both back toward the bank, using the strap as an anchor. The current tried to tear them away, but inch by inch, they made it to safety. Sutter collapsed on the concrete, coughing and shivering. At the far end of the spillway, state trooper cruisers had materialized through the storm, their red and blue lights painting the rain in alternating colors. They boxed in Keen's truck with precision, leaving him nowhere to run. Through the windshield, they could see him slowly raise his hands in surrender. Hollis approached the ranking trooper, her movements deliberate and professional. She handed over the GPS-tagged ledger bag, carefully documenting the transfer. "Chain of custody maintained throughout," she stated clearly. "Evidence of trafficking, falsified documents, and conspiracy." Silas, still dripping from his rescue effort, pulled out his phone. His hands shook slightly as he transferred the video footage from the depot to the troopers' evidence team. The images were damning. Rows of cages, injured animals, Keen's threats, captured in real time. The troopers worked methodically, collecting Sutter's signed affidavit about Ria's faked death and securing the fuel can Keen had used to try burning away his crimes. Each piece fit together, forming an undeniable picture of corruption and cruelty. Silas made his way back to the truck on unsteady legs. The pup was right where he'd left him, warm and safe in the cab. As Silas pulled the small body close to his chest, he felt the steady thump of the pup's heart against his own. For the first time since that desperate scratching at his clinic door, Silas allowed himself to take a full, deep breath. The night's long battle was finally over. The aftermath unfolded like a slow sunrise after the longest night. In the weeks following the arrests, charges against Keen and Sutter mounted steadily. The district attorney's office filed a devastating array of counts: first-degree arson, multiple charges of animal cruelty, falsifying official records, and conspiracy. Each charge carried weight, backed by the pristine chain of evidence Hollis and Silas had preserved through that rain-soaked night. As expected, the corporate veterinary chain wasted no time severing ties with Silas. The termination letter cited multiple policy violations and unauthorized after-hours operations. Silas read it once, then set it aside without regret. The corporate rules that had once felt like shackles now seemed as insubstantial as smoke. Within a month, he stood in front of a weathered brick building on the edge of town, painting fresh letters on the window. Whitcomb Rescue and Veterinary. The morning light caught the gold lettering, making it shine like a promise. Inside, newly installed kennels lined the walls, and the exam rooms sparkled with equipment he'd chosen himself. This time, the rules would protect the animals, not the bottom line. Badge, the brave pup who had started it all, had grown into his paws but not out of his protective nature. He padded at Silas's heels from sunrise to sunset, inspecting each new patient with careful attention. His presence in the exam room seemed to calm nervous animals, as if he could tell them, "Trust him, he saved me first." Ria's recovery proved slower but steady. Under Hollis's watchful care, the former canine gradually regained her strength. Though she would never work again, she found a different purpose. Hollis often brought her to the clinic, where she would lie in the sun-warmed waiting room, a living testament to survival. Children would stop to pet her, and Hollis would quietly explain how this brave dog had helped catch bad guys, both in her police days and after. It felt right, having Wade's partner find peace with his sister. One crisp morning, Silas arrived early to check on an overnight patient. He found Hollis already there, 2 steaming coffee cups in her hands. Without words, they fell into step together, making their rounds of the rescue kennels. Each dog had a story now, not just intake numbers, but names and futures. "The DA says Keen's looking at 15 to 20 years, Hollis mentioned, her shoulder brushing against his as they walked. Sutter took a plea deal. He's testifying about the whole operation, right up to the county level. Silas nodded, watching Badge trot ahead of them, checking each kennel with his characteristic thoroughness. "Justice has a way of finding daylight," he said softly. They paused at the end of the run, where the morning sun streamed through high windows. Hollis's fingers found his, warm from the coffee cup she'd been holding. The touch felt natural, like everything else that had grown between them through crisis and courage. "You know," she said, "Wade would have loved this place." Her voice held pride instead of pain. "He always said a badge meant protecting the ones who couldn't protect themselves." Silas squeezed her hand gently. That's what we'll keep doing." Badge circled back to them, pressing against their legs as if to join their quiet circle. Above them, the new clinic sign caught the morning light, no longer a corporate logo but a symbol of something earned through fire and faith. Where fear had once ruled their decisions, justice now stood guard. What had begun with a desperate pup's plea had transformed into something larger, a sanctuary built on truth, a partnership forged in crisis, and a love that had grown as naturally as sunrise after storm. They didn't need grand declarations or speeches. Everything that mattered was right there in the morning, quiet. Hollis's hand in his, Badge's steady presence, and the knowledge that they had built something honest and true. The rain and fire had washed away the old constraints, leaving them free to step into this new day together, protectors of the voiceless, keepers of trust. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.